Do you like Bizarre Podcasts? If the answer is yes, then why don't you join our Facebook group to be updated? Also, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter. Just search Bizarre Podcasts and look for the logo. And if you could leave a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. And now, on with the show.
Welcome to Bizarre Podcasts.
Time travel has always been a subject that's always fascinated me. Imagine if it was possible to travel back in time and visit loved ones that had passed, or go even further and witness famous historical events, or perhaps travel forwards to see what world would be like in 100 years. At the moment, of course, all of this is just fantasies, but some of the greatest minds on the planet think that this could be possible, in theory. But what if nature doesn't require a H.G. Wells time machine, or a plutonium-powered DeLorean? What if time slips occurred naturally all around us? What if, say, one day we were taking a stroll, and suddenly we find ourselves 75 years back in the past? That may just have happened to one man featured in today's episode, and his name was Rudolph Fentz. The story of Rudolph Fentz is said to have first come into the public's attention in a 1951 science fiction short story written by a Mr. Jack Finney. The short story told of a man who it seemed was taken from his own time and appeared dazed and confused in the middle of a 1950s Times Square in New York. For years the story was believed to be true, and it quickly became an urban legend, and the book it was published in long forgotten. The tale became very popular in the 1980s, and then eventually with the introduction of the internet in the 1990s, it was available around the world, where it was reported and presented as fact and evidence of time travel. Even though the short story has been sourced to the 1951 publication, it is believed by some to be a true account, and the mention of the 1951 publication is just another means to cover up the story and the facts. Now, the story may be true, it may be false, but as always, I'll leave that up to you to decide. Here is the story of Rudolph Fentz, the Times Square time traveller. In June 1950, a man suddenly appeared out of thin air in the centre of New York City's Times Square. His clothing was old-fashioned, even for 1950. Also, the man's hairstyle and the grooming of his beard also seemed out of fashion for that time period. For a few seconds he looked around in astonishment and utter fear, and without warning he broke out into a panic-fueled sprint. He ran into the road and was hit and killed instantly by a passing car, and the mystery followed him to the grave. When the police arrived and searched the body, they found a copper token for a beer that was worth 5 cents, which had the name of a saloon printed on the side, a bill for the care of a horse and the washing of a carriage from a livery stable. The address on the bill read Lexington Avenue. This address was not listed in any address book. He had about $70 in outdated banknotes, a few business cards with the name Rudolph Fentz written on the side, as well as his address on Fifth Avenue, a letter sent to the same address on the business cards, and finally, a medal for coming third in a three-legged race. All of these antiquity items had no sign whatsoever of aging on them. The Missing Persons Department of the NYPD tried to identify this unknown man with the items on his person. The current owner of the address on the card had never heard of Rudolph Fentz, and his name was not listed on the address. Also, his fingerprints were not recorded anywhere, and no one had reported him missing. Eventually, a Mr. Rudolph Fentz Jr. was discovered after some extensive investigation. The name was found in a telephone book, which was dated 1939. The residence of Rudolph Fentz Jr. was tracked down, and the residents of the apartment there remembered a 60-year-old man who went by the same name, but unfortunately he had moved away in 1940 to an unknown location. The local bank was then contacted. The investigator was told, unfortunately Rudolph Fentz Jr. had passed away 5 years previous, but the address of his widow was discovered, who was alive and well living in Florida. The investigator contacted Rudolph Fentz Jr.'s widow and discovered that her late husband's father, Rudolph Fentz, had disappeared in 1876, aged 29 years old. It is said that one night in 1876, Rudolph Fentz had left the house for an evening stroll, but he never returned. Search parties were led to find him, but no body was ever found. It was as if Rudolph Fentz had simply disappeared. Upon checking the missing person file, the investigator discovered that the description of the missing man in 1876 matched up perfectly to the dead man he now had in his morgue that seemed to have just appeared out of thin air in the middle of Times Square, New York, almost 75 years later. So, was this time travel story fiction or true? Was there ever a Rudolph Fentz who was accidentally thrown 74 years into the future by some unnatural cause of nature, only to meet his end by being hit by a car? Or was this pure fiction that was at some point in its many publications presented wrongly as possible fact to sell more books? Or maybe, just maybe, the truth was turned into a short story to cover up what may have really happened at Times Square, New York in 1950. But as always, I'll let you decide. Take care. I'll see you next time.